It was in 1978 in Israel. There was a huge discussion about the laws of abortion. What should the government adopt to allow abortion, not to allow abortion, what kind of scenarios? And one of the most vocal proponents for abortion was a man named Shmuel Tamir, who was then the Minister of Justice. And before this law went up for voting in the government, a delegation from Agudat Yisrael came to Shmuel Tamir to talk to him. One of the members of the delegation was a man named Rabbi Rafal Levin, whose father, Rabbi Aryeh Levin, was very prominent, very respected. He was called the Tzaddik of Jerusalem because of his activities in protecting Jewish prisoners. And there was quite a lot of, there were many government dignitaries who had a deep respect for Rabbi Aryeh Levin because of his work in the early days of the State of Israel. And so when this delegation wanted to approach Mr. Shmuel Tamir and to ask him to perhaps reconsider his stance, they thought a good person to bring with them would be Rabbi Rafal Levin, who was the son of this famous tzaddik, Rabbi Aryeh Levin. So in the middle of the conversation, Rabbi Rafal Levin tells Shmuel Tamir the following story. He said there was a couple in Ramat Gan many years ago who were married and they were having a very hard time financially, and they were considering aborting their child. And my father was called to talk to them. The parents of this couple, the parents of the mother, the pregnant mother, came to my father's home and asked my father to speak to the couple. Perhaps he could convince them not to abort their child, but to give birth to the child. So my father went to the home. He came in the middle of the night. My father was a recognized personality, but he comes to their home middle of the night, like, why is he there? They invited him into their home, and he didn't say a word. He just sat there, and he burst out crying. And she understood why he was crying. And after a while of him just sitting there and crying, she also started to cry. And she said, I promise you, you don't have to cry. You don't have to cry. I promise you, I'll give birth to this child. And sure enough, she gave birth to this child, and this child's name was Shmuel. And he said to this minister, do you know which Shmuel this was? And he said, no. He said, it was you, Shmuel Tamir. And he couldn't believe it. He said, if this story is true, then I will do everything I can to support your stance in the Knesset. And he called up his mother, and his mother started to cry. And she said, you don't understand what it was like, the finances, the difficulties. But the fascinating thing of the story is the way Rabbi Aryeh Levin convinced this mother to have her baby. He didn't say a word. He just expressed his care, his love, his concern, his empathy, and automatically she herself was able to come to the right conclusion. This brings us to the subject of this week's Torah portion, where Moshe Rabbeinu, for the first time, before he passes away, begins to rebuke the Jewish people. And Moshe's words are so fascinating that the Torah says that God says that the words of Moshe Rabbeinu, his words of rebuke, are as precious to me as the Ten Commandments. When words of rebuke are issued in a way that are done with the sensitivity and the wisdom of Moshe Rabbeinu, then Hashem says they're considered to be as precious as the Ten Commandments. So we need to analyze what was the formula that Moshe used, and what formula should we use when there is a situation which seems to call for our input. Everyone's been there. You know someone who could use some advice. You see what direction they're going in, and you've been in that direction. And you know that you could possibly give them some insight, but on the other hand, you don't know what the reaction will be. You know that when someone tries to give you some advice, sometimes you are visceral and you don't want to hear, and how do you know what the response will be? And see, everyone has these moments in families and friends where it seems like you're doomed if you do and doomed if you don't. So what is the right approach? And how can we learn from Moshe's words? So let's go through a couple of different components in Moshe's rebuke that we should all pay attention to. First of all, in order for anyone to want to change for the better, they have to be empowered. They have to feel strong. No one ever changes because they feel weak. When someone's humiliated, when someone feels low, it never causes them to change. What causes a person to change is when they feel empowered and strong. So therefore, Moses begins his words to Jewish people with blessings, empowering them, giving them inspiration, giving them strength, giving them a sense of goodness and greatness, lifting them up. More, Moses mentions in his initial words of rebuke, I'm talking to you after the victory against the king Sichon, after the king, with the victory over the various things we had in the desert, showing the Jewish people how strong we are, how great we are, and we've already been victorious over these giants, over these insurmountable odds. By doing this, Moshe is lifting the Jewish people up. But then Moshe continues. The Talmud says that any love that does not have rebuke in that love is not a real love. You know, when you go into a synagogue and you see someone speaking harshly to a child, you know that that's their child. No one speaks harshly to a child who's not their own. Rebuke comes from a deep place of care. But again, it needs to be done in the right way. So a second thing we see in Moshe's words is he talks to them as they are about to enter Israel, as they're about to start a new chapter in their lives, new chapter in our history. They're there by the plains of Moab overlooking the land of Israel, and they have their vision inside of a fresh start. In order for a person to consider upgrading their character, it's very often helpful that they feel that there's this promise. I know many times I've visited this show in Las Vegas because I have a synagogue in downtown, and many of the people in the synagogue are in the fashion industry. So when they have this show called Magic, where they have the entire downtown in one room in the one of the hotels over there in Las Vegas, it's much easier to meet everyone together. So that's my job, to meet Jews. So I often took the opportunity and went to many of these shows to meet all the Jews in one room and put on film many people. And I noticed something, that there are many people would only consider making strides in their Judaism at this show because they felt like this is a new promise, this is a new season of their merchandise, and at that stage they're more open to making new decisions. Like you find a groom and a bride, they're about to get married, or at the beginning of a school year, children beginning of a school year, all of a sudden they're open, their hearts and minds are open to a new change, and so too Moses waited for this moment where they're about to enter Israel. Thirdly, Moses spoke to the Jewish people right before he passed away. Moses knew that in order for a person to hear words of rebuke, they have to have the absolute certainty that the one who is giving the rebuke has their best interests in mind. That's often why rebuke fails, often why words of advice fail, even though there's a lot of love and care in those words, but the person who's receiving them feels very low and he feels threatened, and he responds viscerally because he feels he's being attacked. So in order for the words to have any effect, the person has to feel the one who's talking to him really cares about them. It's for their own benefit. So Moses spoke to them before he passed away. He's passing away. He can't possibly have any agenda in his words. It must be solely for their benefit. So that's another component, that in order for the words of rebuke to have any effect, there has to be a clarity in the person who's receiving these words that you mean their best. If you don't think the person you're talking to would be able to accept that you mean their best, then they're not going to be able to handle those words. Maybe you shouldn't say them. Right before the Rebbe's Rebbe's first stroke, he spoke about how only someone who looks up to you like a father figure, is willing to hear words of rebuke from you. If someone doesn't have that relationship, you may have the wisest things to say, but if the person's receiving them doesn't look at you in the context of someone that has this love for them, you won't be able to hear it. Another thing is, when Moses issues these words of rebuke, he is very careful not to make a frontal broadside attack. Moses alludes to all the mistakes Jewish people made. He just says the locations where these mistakes were made. In the desert, alluding to the sin of the Jewish men with the daughters of Moab. Moses says, near the Yam Suf, near the Reed Sea, alluding to how the Jewish people, in a state of confusion, asked God, why'd you bring us here? Were there no graves in Egypt that you have to bring us to the Reed Sea? Why don't you just bury us in Egypt? Again, Moses just alludes to the place and the location where we had this ambivalence and fright and confusion and doubt. Further, Moses mentions Chatzeros. That was a place where Korach led his rebellion against Moses. And Moses speaks about Lavan, Tophel, and the word Lavan means white. Moses was alluding to how the Jewish people were complaining about the man which had a white color. He didn't go straight out and point out their faults, just alluded to, just touched on the moments of confusion. And the big one, the biggest obvious sin, he leaves at the end. And the way he says it is very fascinating. He says, Di Zahav. Di Zahav means the place where you had lots of gold. He's referring to the sin of the golden calf. And by calling the sin of the golden calf a place of lots of gold, does two things. In order for a person to be able to hear anything negative, they have to be able to look at themselves in the mirror and feel good about themselves. Otherwise, they can't hear it. Moses, when God said to Moses that the Jewish people had sinned with the golden calf, Moses responded to God and said, it's your fault. You gave them so much gold. What should they have done? The gold, the money made them a sugar. The money made them crazy. That's why they did the sin of the golden calf. In a similar way, before Moses passes away, and he reminds them of the sin of the golden calf, he reminds them of the gold. He says it was because of the gold. He's giving them an alibi. He's saying, it wasn't so much your fault. It was a really challenging circumstance. That's what happens. And also, another important point, Moses was forward thinking. He wasn't talking about what happened in the past. He was talking about all of this gold and how they should pay attention in the future when they are blessed with wealth, how to use their wealth. So Moses was directing their attention to the future, wasn't talking about the past. Rebuke has to always be forward to where the person can go to, but not about the past. As the Rebbe said, one action is better than 1,000 sighs. And actually, so letter the Rebbe this morning, the Rebbe speaks about how sighing isn't healthy. And the Torah encourages us to be healthy. And often when a person sighs, they feel like they've done God a favor by sighing. And they're just like, okay, I've sighed, I've done it, now I'm forgiven. So sighing is detrimental to our service of God because, first of all, it damages our body. Second of all, it redirects our thinking to things that are not in our control, things that are in the past. And thirdly, it makes us feel like satiated by this feeling of we feel relieved by the sigh instead of actually focusing on what we need to do. So the goal is never to look at the past. The goal is the future. And this is also echoed in a story of the Sfas Emes, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Alter, the Ger Rebbe. He was a child. He was once studying with his study partner all night long. They were studying Torah, and at the end of the night, he just fell asleep on his book, on his sefer, on his holy Torah book. Next morning, his father passed away when he was very young. His mother, he was raised by his grandfather, the Chedush Harim, Rabbi Yitzchak Meir, who was the founder of the Ger Hasidus, and the Chedush Harim rebukes him. You have to know how important it is to wake up in the morning. When you wake up in the morning, it sets the tone for the whole day. And how can you wake up late? Don't you understand how important it is? you can't ever wake up late. And his study partner is thinking like, he should respond to his grandfather. He should tell his grandfather, Zaidi, it wasn't my fault, I was up all night. But he doesn't say a word. And his study partner asked him, why didn't you tell your grandfather what really happened? He said, don't you understand? My grandfather is telling me how precious it is and how valuable it is to wake up in the morning. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience to hear words from my grandfather about this. I have a chance to hear words from my grandfather. He felt in himself, he didn't feel in himself like belittled, but he felt an opportunity. And this is what the Rebbe Rashab says about criticism. He says, cherish criticism, for criticism will place you on the true heights. Only someone who has a real sense of self-esteem. Self-esteem means to esteem your soul, to esteem your divinity, esteem your godliness, esteem your goodness, is able to hear words of rebuke. Otherwise, our natural instinct is to close the shutters of our brain, not to hear any more words as soon as we feel we're being rebuked, as we feel we're being attacked. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he teaches us in the Torah portion how powerful rebuke is, and how sensitive and how wise and how patient you have to be to make sure that your words are going to be impactful, lift up the other person. Because the goal is never to put down the other person. If you're giving words of rebuke, the only purpose is to lift them up and allow them to see themselves where they need to be. And this is also very connected to this coming Shabbat. This Shabbat is called the Shabbat of Vision. The reason it's called the Shabbat of Vision is because, as I believe it's Berditchev said, Hashem shows every Jew the third temple of the Shabbat. Every moment of the Shabbat, our souls are privy to see the beautiful future era of the coming Mashiach. We're able to see the third temple and all that comes with it. The beautiful revelation of the coming Mashiach. That's, if God forbid Mashiach isn't here by Shabbos, this Shabbat we all experience this revelation. And the purpose of this, Rabbi Berditchev said, was in order to inspire us that we should be deserving of the coming Mashiach. The reason we're shown the third temple is to lift us up. So how does Hashem rebuke us? How does Hashem change us? He rebukes us by showing us how good it's going to be and how good we are inside. Because really each of us has a spark of Mashiach in us. And seeing the third Beis HaMikdash is really a mirror of who we really are inside. And this is where Hashem wants us to focus on right now, and to see the goodness of ourselves, goodness of each other. Be very careful about people in our lives. Don't take the sucker's choice of fight or flight. Either I'm going to say it like it is, or I'm going to just retreat into my cave. It's not true. Learn from Moses that there's a way and there's a method, there's a wisdom, and to really think carefully. And Hashem will help us all that we should merit to see the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, the Karav Mamish. Have a wonderful Shabbos.